The rain fell in sheets across the small town of Millridge. Water rushed down the streets like small rivers. The wind howled and bent the trees until they almost touched the ground. Lightning cracked open the sky every few minutes, followed by thunder that shook the windows of every building. Inside the Crossroads diner, Elaine Murphy wiped down the counter one more time. She was a woman in her 50s with gray streaks in her brown hair and hands that told stories of decades of hard work. The diner had been in her family for 3 generations, and she knew every crack in the tile floor and every squeak in the old swinging door to the kitchen. Might as well close up early, she said to herself. No one would be out in this weather, and the lights had been flickering for the past hour. Elaine had already put candles on each table, just in case. She was about to turn the sign on the door to closed when the lights went out completely. The diner plunged into darkness except for the faint glow of the emergency exit sign and the candles she had lit earlier. Then she heard it, the sound of engines outside. Through the rain-streaked windows, she saw 3 large utility trucks pulling into her parking lot. Their headlights cut through the darkness like searchlights. Elaine quickly lit more candles as the front door burst open. 6 men in bright yellow rain gear stumbled in, dripping water all over her clean floor. Their faces were tired and drawn, their shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "Ma'am, sorry to barge in like this," said the tallest one, removing his hard hat. "I'm Frank Daniels, crew foreman with Millridge Power and Light. We've been working non-stop since the storm hit. Is there any chance you're still serving?" Elaine looked at their weary faces and made a quick decision. "The power's out, but I've got a gas stove in the back and plenty of food that needs to be eaten before it spoils. Have a seat, gentlemen." The men practically collapsed into the nearest booth. The youngest one, who couldn't have been more than 25, put his head down on the table. The others removed their wet outer layers and hung them on the coat rack by the door. "Coffee first," Elaine announced, heading to the kitchen. "Then we'll see about food." The old gas stove was a relic that most modern restaurants would have thrown out years ago, but tonight it was worth its weight in gold. Elaine had the coffee brewing in minutes, and the smell seemed to breathe life back into the tired workers. As she placed steaming mugs in front of each man, she noticed they weren't just tired, they were worried. They spoke in low voices, glancing out the windows every few minutes as if expecting something to follow them. "Everything all right out there?" she asked, placing a plate of sandwiches on the table. "Besides the obvious, I mean." The men exchanged glances. Frank, the foreman, seemed to be considering his words carefully. "Not exactly," he finally said, wrapping his hands around the coffee mug. "We've been seeing some strange things while trying to restore power." Another worker, a stocky man with a thick beard who had introduced himself as Pete, leaned forward. "The outage pattern makes no sense. Usually when lines go down in a storm, there's a logic to it. But this," he shook his head, "it's like the power is being sucked out from a central point. And that point is the old research facility on the edge of town," added another worker named Hank. He was older than the rest, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. "You know the place? Been abandoned for decades now." Elaine knew it well. The Millridge Research Facility had been built in the 1960s and officially closed down in the early 90s. It was a massive concrete structure surrounded by chain-link fence and no trespassing signs. As a child, she had been warned to stay away from it. "We were out that way earlier," Frank continued, "trying to find the source of the problem. Our equipment started going haywire, readings that made no sense, and there were lights coming from inside the facility." "Lights?" Elaine asked. "But it's been closed for years." "That's what everyone thinks," said the youngest worker, who had introduced himself as Kenny. "But we saw it, bright lights like something powering up." Just then, Frank's radio crackled to life. He grabbed it quickly, but instead of a voice, there was only static followed by a high-pitched whine that made everyone wince. Frank turned the radio off with a frown. "That's the 3rd time that's happened. All our communications equipment is failing, cell phones too." Elaine looked out the window at the storm. The rain seemed to be falling harder now, and the wind had picked up. But there was something else, a faint blue glow on the horizon in the direction of the old research facility. "We need to get back out there." Frank said, standing up. "Thank you for the food and coffee, ma'am. What do we owe you?" Elaine waved him off. "On the house, you boys are out there trying to get our power back on. It's the least I can do." As they put their rain gear back on, Elaine made a decision that would change her life forever. "I'm coming with you," she said. The men looked at her in surprise. "No offense, ma'am," said Pete, "but it's dangerous out there. Downed power lines, flooding." "I know a back way to the facility," Elaine interrupted. "An old service road that's not on any maps. My father used to work security there before it closed. And it sounds like you could use all the help you can get." Frank studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "We could use a guide, but you stay in the truck." "Understood." Elaine quickly grabbed her raincoat and a flashlight from behind the counter. As she locked up the diner, she glanced back at the small building that had been her life for so many years. Something told her that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same. They piled into the largest utility truck, and Frank turned to Elaine. "Which way?" Elaine pointed past the main road toward a barely visible dirt path that led into the woods. "That way. It'll take us right to the back entrance." As they drove away from the diner, none of them noticed the brief flicker of all the lights inside, despite the power being out, or the way the radio suddenly turned itself back on, playing nothing but static. The storm continued to rage, but it was nothing compared to what waited for them at the Millridge Research Facility. The truck bounced along the old service road, headlights cutting through the rain and darkness. Inside, Elaine gripped the door handle as they hit another deep pothole. The wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour, and lightning flashed overhead, briefly lighting up the forest around them. "Road gets rough through here," Elaine said. "Nobody's maintained it for years." Frank kept both hands tight on the steering wheel. The other linemen sat in silence, their faces ghostly in the dim light of the dashboard. Kenny, the youngest, kept checking his phone. "Still no signal," he said, shaking his head. Pete looked out the window and frowned. "Anyone else notice the wildlife?" They all peered into the darkness. As the truck moved forward, they could see shapes moving between the trees. Deer, raccoons, and other forest animals were all running in the same direction, away from where they were heading. "Animals can sense things we can't," Hank said quietly. "They know when something ain't right." The truck rounded a bend, and suddenly the trees opened up to reveal a large clearing. In the center stood the Millridge Research Facility. It was a massive concrete structure, 3 stories tall with few windows. A chain-link fence surrounded the property with signs warning people to keep out. But something was wrong. The place was supposed to be abandoned, shut down for decades. Yet there were fresh tire tracks in the mud leading to the main gate. And mounted on the fence, partly hidden by overgrown bushes, were modern security cameras. "Someone's been here recently," Frank said, slowing the truck to a stop just before the clearing. He killed the headlights and they sat in the dark rain drumming on the roof. "I thought this place was closed down in the 90s, Pete said. Elaine nodded. "It was. At least that's what everyone in town was told. My father worked security here until the shutdown. He never talked about what they did inside, but he had nightmares for years after. A blue flash lit up the sky, but it wasn't lightning. It came from somewhere inside the facility, a pulse of light that shone briefly through a few windows on the top floor. That's no normal electricity, Hank said. He had been with the power company for 30 years. I've never seen anything like it. Frank turned to look at them all. We need to get in there. I think whatever's happening inside is causing the blackout. The gate will be locked, Kenny said. Frank smiled slightly. We work for the power company, kid. We have access to almost every property in the county. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. Universal utility override. For emergencies. They drove up to the main gate. Frank and Pete got out in the rain to unlock it. As they touched the metal gate, both men jumped back. It's vibrating, Pete said when they got back in the truck. His face was pale. Like it's hooked up to power, but not enough to shock you, just enough to feel wrong. They drove through the gate and up to the main building. The parking lot was Empty except for a single white van with no markings or license plates. Frank parked next to it and they all sat looking at the building's entrance. I shouldn't be here, Elaine said suddenly. This was a bad idea. I should wait in the truck. Frank looked at her. You know this place better than any of us, and if something happens, we might need you to go for help. Reluctantly, Elaine nodded. They got out of the truck and ran through the rain to the main entrance. The door should have been locked, but it swung open easily. Inside, the air was dry and smelled of ozone, like after a lightning strike. The lobby was dusty and abandoned, with a reception desk covered in years of dirt and dead leaves blown in from outside. But on the wall behind the desk was something that shouldn't have been there. A modern keypad security system with a small green light glowing. Kenny walked over to examine it. This was installed recently, top-of-the-line stuff. Hank wandered deeper into the lobby, shining his flashlight around. Guys, come look at this. They gathered around what appeared to be a building directory on the wall. It showed 3 floors above ground and, more surprisingly, 5 levels below ground. Underground levels, Pete said. That's not on any of the official blueprints. I've seen the town records. A loud hum suddenly filled the air and the lights in the hallway beyond the lobby flickered on. The sound of machinery powering up came from somewhere deep in the building. They're drawing even more power, Frank said. The whole grid is going to collapse if this keeps up. They moved deeper into the facility, following the humming sound. In what once might have been an employee break room, they found something bizarre. Every electronic device, old vending machines, a microwave, a dusty television, was turning on and off by itself. The TV showed only static, but the static seemed to form patterns, almost like faces. We should leave, Kenny whispered. Right, now. But before anyone could respond, a new sound caught their attention, the whirring of an elevator coming to life. They followed the sound down a hallway where the elevator doors were slowly opening. No one was inside. It's inviting us in, Pete said. Or something is, Hank added. Frank looked at each of them. We came here to find out what's causing them. Blackout. That answer's below us, I'm sure of it. I'm going down there. Not alone, you're not, Pete said, stepping forward. One by one, they all agreed to go, even Elaine, though her hands shook as she entered the elevator. How far down? Frank asked, looking at the control panel. Instead of floor numbers, there were only strange symbols. Elaine pointed to one that looked vaguely like a star. My father drew this once in his sleep. He was having a nightmare. Frank pressed the button. The doors closed and the elevator began to descend, much faster and deeper than seemed possible. The walls of the elevator shaft were visible through a small window in the door, rough concrete giving way to bare earth, then to something that looked like solid rock. How deep does this go? Kenny whispered. After what seemed like minutes, the elevator slowed and finally stopped. The doors opened to reveal a corridor that looked nothing like the abandoned facility above. This was new, clean, and well lit, with smooth metal walls and floors that gleamed. The air hummed with energy, and at the far end of the corridor was a massive set of double doors marked with a warning symbol none of them recognized and a single word, threshold. Frank stepped forward and placed his hand on the large double doors marked threshold. The metal felt warm, almost alive beneath his touch. He looked back at the others, their faces showing a mixture of fear and curiosity. Whatever's causing the blackout is behind these doors, he said. We need to see it. He pushed and the heavy doors swung open with surprising ease. The group gasped at what lay beyond. They were standing at the edge of an enormous circular chamber, at least 50 yards across. The walls curved up to form a dome and the floor dropped away into a pit in the center. Around this pit was a ring of machinery unlike anything they had ever seen. Cables as thick as a man's arm snaked across the floor, all feeding into strange devices that hummed and pulsed with energy. Blue-white light flickered through the room, coming from the pit itself. What is this place? Kenny whispered, his young face pale in the eerie light. Elaine shook her head slowly. Nothing like this was ever supposed to be here. Hank, who had worked with electrical systems his entire life, walked closer to examine the equipment. This is drawing massive power, enough to black out the whole county. But it's not like any power system I've ever seen. The chamber was empty of people, which seemed strange for such an active facility. Computer screens around the room displayed readings and data, but no one was monitoring them. "Where is everyone?" Pete asked, looking around nervously. Frank pointed to a door on the far side of the chamber. "Let's check through there." They carefully made their way around the edge of the room, staying well back from the pit. As they got closer to the center, they could feel the air becoming charged with static electricity. The hair on their arms stood on end, and small sparks jumped between metal objects. The next room was smaller, filled with desks and computer equipment. Papers were scattered everywhere, coffee cups half full, chairs pushed back, as if everyone had left in a hurry. Kenny sat down at one of the computers. "It's still logged in," he said, tapping a few keys. "Let me see what I can find." The others spread out, examining the room. Elaine picked up a notebook and flipped through it. "Project Threshold," she read aloud. "Phase 3 activation scheduled during next major weather event." She looked up at the others. They were waiting for the storm. "Got something," Kenny called out. The others gathered around the computer screen. This place was never shut down. They just moved everything underground and told the town it was closed. "What were they doing here?" Pete asked. Kenny scrolled through files on the screen. It started as energy research, looking for new power sources, but then they found something else. He clicked on a video file. The screen showed a laboratory, with scientists in white coats working around a small version of the pit they had seen in the main chamber. As they watched, a pulse of energy shot up from the pit, and for a brief moment something appeared in the air above it. What looked like a window into another place, a landscape with a purple sky and strange rock formations. "They found a way to open a door to somewhere else," Kenny said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Another dimension." Frank leaned closer to the screen. "What went wrong? Why did they leave?" Kenny opened more files, reading quickly. They kept making the portal bigger, hoping to send people through. But then they started getting readings from the other side. Something was sending signals back. Suddenly, all the lights in the room flickered, and a low rumble shook the floor. The pit in the main chamber glowed brighter. "It's powering up," Hank said. "Whatever they built is still running on automatic." Frank grabbed a printed sheet from the desk. "Evacuation order," he read. "Signed yesterday. It says, 'Unexpected feedback from the other side. Entity detection confirmed. Project suspended pending review.'" They knew something was coming through. "And they just left?" Another rumble, stronger this time. From the main chamber came a sound like crackling electricity, growing louder. "We need to shut it down," Pete said, "before whatever's on the other side gets here." They rushed back to the main chamber. The blue light from the pit was pulsing faster now, and in the center of the pit a small point of light had appeared, growing larger by the second. "The controls have to be here somewhere," Frank said, looking desperately around the room. Hank ran to a large panel on the wall. "This looks like the main power distribution. If we can cut the input." The door they had come through earlier suddenly slammed shut with a heavy clang. Red warning lights began to flash, and an automated voice came over speakers. "Security. Protocol engaged. Unauthorized presence detected. Facility lockdown initiated." "They know we're here," Kenny said, backing away from the computers. "Not they," Elaine said, pointing at a camera in the corner that moved on its own, tracking their movements. The system is automated." Hank was still working at the panel. "I can't shut it down from here, it's protected." "The point of light?" In the pit suddenly expanded, forming a swirling circle about 3 feet across. Through it, they could see the alien landscape from the video, but now with more detail. And movement. Something was moving toward the portal from the other side. "We're trapped down here with that thing," Pete said, his voice cracking with fear. Frank looked around the room with new determination. "Maybe being locked in is exactly what we need. If we can't shut it down properly, maybe we can break it." He turned to Hank. "You know power systems better than anyone. If we wanted to overload this thing, make it short out, how would we do it?" Hank thought for a moment. "We'd need to create a power surge, but a controlled one. direct too much energy back into the main system all at once. Could we use the storm? Elaine asked. It's still raging outside. Lightning strikes. Hank nodded, slowly. If we could channel lightning down here somehow, direct it into the right systems. The facility has lightning rods on the roof, Kenny said, looking at a building schematic on one of the screens. They're connected to a grounding system that runs right through here. As they talked, the portal grew larger, now nearly 6 feet across. Through it, they could clearly see something approaching, a tall mechanical shape that moved with purpose. Whatever we're going to do, Pete said, backing away from the pit. We need to do it fast. Frank grabbed a tablet from one of the desks and brought up the facility schematics. The others gathered around him, their faces lit by the glowing blue light from the portal. Here, he said, pointing to a diagram of the electrical systems. The lightning rods on the roof connect to these conduits, which run down to a grounding system on this level. Hank studied the schematic and nodded. If we could redirect that power into the portal machinery instead of letting it disperse through the grounding system, we might overload it. But how do we do that? Pete asked. We're locked in here. Kenny was still at the computer terminal. Maybe not completely locked in. Look at this. He pointed to a map of the facility on the screen. There are maintenance tunnels running between the sections. They might not be part of the lockdown system. Frank looked closer at the tablet. He's right. There's a maintenance access panel in that corner. They hurried to where Frank had pointed. Behind a metal panel, they found a narrow tunnel with pipes and cables running along its length. It'll be tight, but we can fit through, Frank said. He turned to Elaine. You don't have to come. This isn't your job. Elaine shook her head firmly. I'm not staying here alone with that. She nodded toward the portal, which was now 7 feet across. The mechanical shape on the other side was closer, its outline becoming clearer, something like a robot, but with too many limbs moving with unnatural speed. One by one, they squeezed into the maintenance tunnel. It was hot and narrow, with barely enough room to crawl on hands and knees. Cables ran along the ceiling, humming with electricity. According to the map, this should lead to the main power distribution room, Frank said from the front of the line. If we can get there, we can rewire the lightning rod connections. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Behind them, they could hear the sound of the portal growing louder, a high-pitched whine that hurt their ears. Several times, the whole facility shook and dust rained down on them from the ceiling of the tunnel. Storm's getting worse, Pete said. That's good for us, right? More lightning? As long as the building holds together, Hank replied. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they reached another access panel. Frank pushed it open, and they emerged into a room filled with electrical equipment, breaker boxes, transformers, and control panels. This is it, Hank said, immediately moving to the largest panel. This controls where the power from the lightning rods goes. Right now, it's all being diverted into the grounding system. Kenny examined another panel. And this one controls power to the portal chamber. If we connect these two, we could send a lightning strike directly into the portal machinery. Frank finished. Would that close the portal? Elaine asked. Hank shook his head. I don't know, but it would definitely overload the systems controlling it. It might collapse the portal or it might make it unstable. Either way, better than letting whatever that thing is come through, Pete said. They set to work quickly, using their linemen, tools to open panels and reroute connections. Frank and Hank worked on the lightning rod controls while Pete and Kenny modified the power distribution to the portal chamber. Elaine watched the door, worried about what might come through it. Almost. Got it, Frank said, connecting 2 heavy cables. Once this is in place, the next lightning strike that hits the building will be channeled directly into the portal systems. Suddenly, a new alarm began to sound. Different from the lockdown alarm, higher pitched and more urgent. What is that? Pete asked, looking up from his work. Kenny ran to a computer terminal in the corner of the room. Portal stability alert. It's becoming unstable on its own. The building shook violently, throwing them all off balance. Equipment crashed to the floor and lights flickered. We need to hurry, Frank said, working faster. On the computer screen, they could see a feed from the portal chamber. The portal was now fully open, a swirling blue circle nearly 10 feet across. The mechanical being was at the very edge of it now, one long metal limb reaching through into their world. "It's coming through," Elaine cried. "Almost done," Hank said, making the final connections. "There, now we just need a lightning strike." As if on cue, the building shook with the impact of a massive lightning bolt. Lights flared brilliantly and then went dark. Emergency lighting kicked on, bathing the room in a red glow. "Did it work?" Pete asked. They all looked at the screen. The portal was still there, but it was fluctuating wildly, expanding and contracting. The mechanical being had pulled back as if sensing danger. "We need more power," Frank said. "A bigger strike." Kenny looked at the readouts. "The portal is becoming more unstable. If we hit it with another surge while it's like this, it might collapse completely," Hank finished. "Or it might explode and take half the county with it," Pete added. Frank looked at them all. "We have to try, but someone needs to manually trigger the surge at exactly the right moment. The timing has to be perfect." "From where?" Elaine asked. Frank pointed to the screen, to a control panel in the portal chamber. "From there. When the portal reaches maximum instability, that's when we hit it with another surge." They all fell silent, understanding what this meant. Someone would have to go back to the chamber, right next to the unstable portal and the being trying to come through. "I'll go," Frank said quietly. "The rest of you get back up to the surface, use the maintenance tunnels to find a way out." "No," Pete started to argue, but Frank cut him off. "I'm the foreman. This is my call." He looked at each of them. "Kenny, you have a family. Pete, you're getting married next month. Hank, you've got grandkids, and Elaine, this town needs you. I'm the right choice for this." Before anyone could argue further, the building shook with another lightning strike. On the screen, they could see the portal fluctuating wildly. "It's now or never," Frank said. He grabbed a radio from a nearby desk. "I'll take this. Get to the surface and call for help once you have signal. If this works, they'll need to secure this place." He headed for the door, then paused and looked back at them. "It's been an honor working with you all. Even you, Elaine, though we just met." He smiled. "Best cup of coffee I ever had." Then he was gone, running back toward the portal chamber while the others watched on the screen, hoping for a miracle as the storm raged on above them. Elaine, Kenny, Pete, and Hank watched the small screen in horror as Frank made his way back to the portal chamber. The feed was grainy and kept cutting out, but they could see him moving carefully along the edge of the room, staying as far from the portal as possible. "We can't let him do this alone," Pete said suddenly. Hank put a hand on his shoulder. "He's right about one thing. We need to get to the surface and call for help. The best way to honor what he's doing is to make sure it matters." The building shook again as another lightning bolt struck. On the screen, they saw Frank stumble and catch himself against a wall. The portal was now pulsing erratically, growing and shrinking in quick bursts. The mechanical being had retreated slightly from the threshold but was still visible, waiting. "Let's go," Kenny said. "Back through the maintenance tunnel. There has to be a way up." Reluctantly, they turned away from the screen and made their way back into the narrow passage. This time Kenny led the way, using a small flashlight to guide them. The tunnel branched several times and they took turns heading upward whenever possible. After a tense climb through increasingly tight spaces, they emerged into what looked like a storage room on the ground floor. Old furniture and equipment were covered in dust, but a door on the far side stood partly open. Through it, they could see the main lobby. "We made it," Pete said, relief washing over his face. They hurried through the lobby and out the front entrance. The storm was still raging outside, rain pouring down in sheets. Lightning flashed almost continuously, striking the lightning rods on the roof of the facility again and again. "It's like the storm is focused right on top of this place," Hank said, looking up at the swirling clouds directly overhead. They ran to the truck and piled inside. Kenny tried the radio, but there was still no signal. He checked his phone as well, but had the same result. "We need to get farther from the facility," he said. "The interference is too strong here." Pete started the engine and began to drive back down the access road. They had only gone a few hundred yards when Elaine cried out, "Wait, stop, we can't leave Frank." Pete slammed on the brakes, turning to look at her. What can we do? He chose to stay. But what if there's another way? She looked back at the facility, rain streaming down her face. What if we could trigger the lightning from up here? Hank's eyes widened. The backup generator, he said suddenly. It's connected to the same grid. If we could overload it. Would that work? Kenny asked. Maybe. It's worth a try. They turned the truck around and drove to the side of the building where a large generator sat under a metal awning. Hank and Pete jumped out and ran to it, working quickly despite the rain and wind. Inside the facility, Frank had reached the control panel. He could see that the portal was reaching a critical point of instability. The mechanical being on the other side seemed to sense the danger too. It had pulled back, but other shapes had appeared behind it, more machines waiting to come through. Frank's hand hovered over the final switch, the one that would redirect the next lightning strike, directly into the heart of the portal mechanism. He waited, watching the readings on the panel. The timing had to be perfect. Outside, Hank and Pete had opened the generator's control box and were rewiring it frantically. If we connect these two leads, Hank explained, it should create a power feedback loop into the main system. When the next big strike hit, it'll all go into the portal. Pete finished. They made the final connection and stepped back. Now all they could do was wait for the next lightning bolt. In the portal chamber, Frank saw the reading spike. The portal was at maximum instability. He reached for the switch. A massive lightning bolt struck the building. The generator outside exploded in a shower of sparks. Inside, the power surge hit the portal systems all at once, just as Frank threw the switch. For a moment, everything seemed to hang suspended. The portal froze, a perfect circle of blue light. Then it began to collapse, inward, slowly at first, then faster. The mechanical beings on the other side scrambled backward, but for one of them it was too late. Caught half in and half out as the portal shrank, it was torn apart, metal limbs twisting and breaking. The collapsing portal created a vacuum, pulling everything nearby toward it. Frank held onto the control panel, watching as the portal shrank to a pinpoint of light and then, with a sound like thunder, imploded completely. The shockwave knocked Frank off his feet. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the ceiling cracking above his head. Outside, Elaine, Kenny, Pete, and Hank watched in awe as blue light shot up through the roof of the facility, forming a pillar that reached the clouds. The storm directly above seemed to be sucked into this light, the clouds spiraling down like water down a drain. Then came an explosion that shook the ground beneath their feet. The light vanished, and the facility's roof partially collapsed. For a moment, the storm seemed to pause. Then slowly the clouds began to disperse. The rain eased and the wind died down. The unnatural darkness that had hung over the area began to lift. "Frank," Elaine whispered. Without thinking, she ran toward the building, the others close behind her. They found him in the rubble of the portal chamber, unconscious but alive, protected by a fallen support beam that had created a small space around him. Together, they carried him out of the building and back to the truck. As they drove away, the facility continued to collapse behind them. By the time they reached the main road, it was little more than a pile of concrete and metal. 3 days later, Elaine reopened the Crossroads Diner. The town was still cleaning up after the storm, but power had been restored to most areas. The official story was that lightning had struck the abandoned research facility, causing it to collapse. Few people questioned it. Frank sat at the counter, a bandage on his head but otherwise looking remarkably well for a man who had nearly died. Kenny, Pete, and Hank sat beside him, all of them speaking quietly over coffee. "The government people were at the hospital again yesterday," Frank told them. "Same questions as before." "What did you tell them?" Elaine asked as she refilled their cups. "Same thing we agreed on, that we went to check on a power anomaly and got caught in the collapse. Nothing about portals or machines from another dimension." "Do you think they believe us?" Kenny asked. Hank shrugged. "Does it matter? They bulldozed what was left of the place and sealed it off. Whatever evidence there was is buried now." "Not everything," Pete said. He glanced around to make sure no other customers were nearby, then placed a small metal object on the counter. It was a piece of the mechanical being, a joint from one of its limbs. "I found this in the truck, must have gotten caught in my boot." They all stared at it in silence. It was proof that what they had seen was real. "We should destroy it," Kenny said. "Or we could study it," Frank replied. "Figure out what they were really doing down there, because I don't think that facility was the only one." Elaine picked up the metal piece, feeling its strange weight. "Whatever we decide together." The five of them looked at each other and nodded. They had gone into that facility as strangers and come out as something else. A team, a unit, bound by a secret that could change the world. Outside the diner, a government car drove slowly past, the men inside watching the building with suspicious eyes, but they saw nothing unusual. Just a small-town diner serving coffee to local power company workers. They had no way of knowing that the most important resistance against whatever was trying to come through from the other side had just formed, right there in the Crossroads diner.